Hi everyone, Happy New Year! Welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you all had a great holiday season. And if you're new here, my name is Stephanie. I'm a registered dietitian and sport nutritionist. And in this channel, we talk about everything about sport nutrition and how we can eat to make sure that we are performing at our best. In this video, we are talking about everything you need to know about your post-workout nutrition plan to make sure that you're recovering well for your next exercise session. At the end, I do have some bonus tips for you, so make sure that you watch all the way through to get those tips. One of the main reasons why our nutrition plan after our workouts is so important is because we want to make sure that we are refreshed and ready to go for the next session. We're not sore, we're not feeling fatigued, and sometimes if we don't plan our nutrition around our workouts well, that can lead us to feeling fatigued and sore and not able to push hard in that next training session. If this pattern continues, this may lead us to more frequent injuries and also just not adapting to our training, and therefore we're not improving potentially in what we're doing. And that's the main goal of our workouts, is to make sure that we are getting better every single session. So let's get into it. The three main components of our post-workout is going to be refueling our muscles, repairing our muscles, and also rehydrating. So you can remember it by those three R's. Our first component is to refuel the muscles with the carbohydrates that we burnt during our activity. So very similar to the fact that in our pre-workout we want to have enough carbohydrates to provide the fuel, we also use that during our workouts. So we want to be able to make sure that we're replacing it so that we are ready to go for our next session. Looking at number two, we want to obviously repair the damage that we've done to our muscles. So that would mean we want to make sure that we have some protein in there so that we are making sure that we are adequately repairing and rebuilding and possibly growing extra muscle. And lastly, we want to make sure that we are rehydrating. So especially if you're a heavy sweater and you might be dehydrating yourself during your workouts or your training sessions, we want to make sure that we're drinking enough fluid so that we are maintaining our hydration post-workout. We're going to go a little deeper into each of these components. So the first one here, for refueling your muscle, we want to make sure that the amount of carbs that we are providing our body is actually going to be enough in terms of what we see in research for the best results in recovering some of those glycogen levels or the stored carbohydrates in the muscle. Again, these amounts of carbohydrates and proteins are going to be specific to you as an individual. So these are rough guidelines, but it's very helpful to work with a dietitian like myself to make sure that what you're doing with your nutrition plan is going to be matching what your overall needs are based on your height, your weight, your activity level, and also your goals. Because sometimes if we don't have a lot of carbs that we are able to have during the day, if we're in more of a leaning out phase, we might actually not need to go as high, but that is really dependent on you specifically and your goals. With that being said, the target of carbohydrates that you want to be aiming for in that post-workout recovery plan is about 1 gram per kilo. Then we can also talk about what types of carbohydrates might be better for our recovery. When we look into research, we look at some of these quick digesting or high glycemic carbohydrates versus the lower glycemic carbohydrates. If you haven't heard the term low glycemic or high glycemic before, realistically, that is looking at how quickly the sugar is broken down and released into your system. So the low glycemic carbohydrate would be a slow release of sugar, and that would more so include things like quinoa, brown rice, and whole grain cereals, whereas that higher glycemic carbohydrate might be something like fruit or things like added sugar, which would give you a quick burst of the sugar within the bloodstream within a short amount of time to make sure that we are adequately flooding the system with those carbohydrates. This might be also something like white rice or white pasta or white types of breads. What's really interesting is that sometimes the recommendations for an athlete might actually not quite be the same as what we would recommend for a normal sedentary individual. So it's really important to consider yourself as an active or an athlete when you're thinking about your nutrition plan, because sometimes it might seem a little off as to what we're recommending. In research, it shows that those higher glycemic carbohydrates are actually better in that post-workout nutrition time because, like I said, it floods the system with a lot of carbohydrates, and the muscle is very receptive at that point to soak in the carbohydrates and recover that muscle glycogen or stored carbohydrates much more quickly if it's the higher glycemic carbohydrate versus the lower glycemic carbohydrate. Timing here is also important, so we will talk about that in a little bit. On to component number 2 of how we can repair our muscles to the best of our ability. The amount of protein that we want to have here, again, is individual based on your weight. So it's 0.3 grams per kilo of body weight is what you're aiming for in that post-workout recovery meal. So therefore, you can calculate how much carb and how much protein that you need to be consuming in that meal to make sure that for the most part, you are going to have a good recovery plan. If we get into the types of proteins that we can have, the dairy products or the whey protein has been highly researched in this post-workout realm, especially because it is providing a lot of branched chain amino acids and specifically leucine, which is a potent stimulator of muscle protein synthesis or the building up of your muscles. If you are unable to have dairy or for some reason you can't consume whey protein powder, there's definitely different options and you don't have to go with a protein powder at this time. But even if you're going with a vegetarian source of protein powder, you can get some that are mixing different types of proteins to balance out the amino acids. So really just looking for either kind of 5 grams of branched chain amino acids on the package if you're a vegetarian, or about 1 to 3 grams of leucine per serving of your protein. That's going to be adequate enough to make sure that you have enough leucine to stimulate your muscle protein synthesis. Or you can also do 1 cup of edamame, 1 cup of tofu or tempeh, or even 4 ounces of meat is likely enough to give you enough protein and also enough leucine to be able to maximize your muscle protein synthesis. Last up is rehydrating. We want to make sure that we are not only replacing what we lost during our training, but also continuing to sip to continue that rehydration process because we're still sweating after we're done our workouts. We want to make sure that we're replacing that as well. One really great way to make sure that you're either staying hydrated enough during your workouts and also to know possibly how much you need to rehydrate is taking your weight dry before and after your workouts to see how much weight you've lost. You want to make sure that you're replacing 150% of how much you've lost. So if we're taking our weight and we've lost 1 kilogram of body weight during our workouts, we want to be replacing that with 1.5 liters of fluid after to make sure that we're hydrating properly. When we think about fluid, we want to make sure that we are actually holding on to that fluid. So we don't want to chug 1.5 liters all at once, especially if it's just plain water, because that is going to go straight through you. You're not going to absorb very much, and it's going to make you feel really uncomfortable. So we want to make sure that we are sipping on that liquid throughout the next hour, 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And then we also want to make sure that the food that we are consuming with that fluid also has some salt to it so that we can hold on to that fluid a little bit better. So now we know what we want to eat. We want to be considering next as to when we're actually going to be consuming this meal. Typically, if you are working out every other day or maybe only 3 times a week, if your training load is a little bit lighter right now, you might not need to be as specific as to when you consume this meal because of the fact that your body can naturally replenish all its carbohydrate stores and repair its muscles adequately enough over kind of a 24 to 48 hour period. However, if you are working out every day or even 2 times a day, it becomes really important to make sure that you're consuming that meal as quickly as you can after your workout. The main reason for that is because we have what we call this anabolic or building up period where our muscles are a lot more receptive and can basically be like a sponge and soak in that carbohydrates very quickly if we are consuming that within 30 minutes of our our workouts, and therefore our recovery is actually significantly improved, and our muscle glycogen recovery is much better if we are consuming that within 30 minutes versus 2 hours after. So if you're the type of person who does their workout, goes home, takes a shower, and makes their meal, and maybe it is that 2-hour time frame that you're looking at, you will definitely get a better recovery if you at least consume something small in that 30-minute windows before you're getting to your meal. That anabolic period of time for your protein is actually a little bit longer. Your muscles are a little bit more sensitive to that protein for an extended period of time after, about 24 hours or so. But we want to make sure that we have that combination of carbohydrates and protein to make sure that we are recovering very well in that immediate time. What is really interesting is that there is some evidence that female athletes actually might need to have that protein close to your exercise as well to make sure that we're getting a better recovery. So that just gives us another reason to make sure that we have that combination between your carbs and your protein within that 30-minute window of your post-workout. So now that we know what we need to have in our post-workout nutrition meal, we also know the timing. It's time to get to some examples of some foods that you might be able to consume in that time. So for example, on your way home from your training session, you could have granola bars, you could be sipping on some juice, like packing some juice box, having a banana, you could have some overnight oats to make sure that we're giving our body that carbs right away. You could also continue to sip on your sport drink as well to make sure that we're continuing to provide that carbohydrate right after, and then potentially going home and having something like rice and beans with a glass of milk or some water. You could have something like tofu and some rice, or you could do chicken and rice with a little bit of veg. You could mix some milk with some protein powder and cook your oatmeal in that, or have kind of like an overnight oats with that combination. Or you could also make a smoothie, because smoothies tend to go down a little bit easier for those who can't have any of that solid food right after your training. So that might be something like a sweet potato with some sort of milk or non-dairy milk, protein powder, and maybe some fruit to make sure that we're getting that good combination of hydration with the milk. You've got your protein powder for your protein, and then your carbs are coming from the fruit and the sweet potato. So if you've made it this far, thanks so much for watching all the way through. Here are some bonus tips for you to make sure that you recover like an elite athlete. The first tip I have for you is that omega-3s, such as salmon, might actually be really helpful for reducing that delayed onset of muscle soreness. So obviously we know that omega-3 is an anti-inflammatory, and so if you're really struggling with feeling really sore the next day, it could be your nutrition plan, but it could also be that maybe you're not getting enough omega-3 during your day, and so it could be something to consider to start including. You might also want to consider having some pineapple, possibly in a smoothie or as a part of your snack, because it has an enzyme called bromelain, and it is going to be helpful for that anti-inflammatory property to make sure that we might be less sore the next day. I've talked about this one in a previous video as well. Tart cherries have been shown to reduce inflammation, have antioxidant properties, and also have great polyphenolic compounds. So they would be a great option to include as a post-workout to reduce that muscle soreness for the next day. And the last one that I have for you is magnesium. So consuming something like pumpkin seeds with that recovery meal might be helpful to make sure that we potentially have less muscle damage over our recovery period. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you have any questions, post them below, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!